You ever laugh at something you don't understand and realize too late it was never meant for you? The laughter came easy under the harsh California sun, bouncing off the concrete like loose brass, sharp and careless, the kind that belonged to young men who hadn't yet learned the weight of silence. A half-circle of SEAL recruits standing loose at the edge of the training yard, sleeves rolled, boots dusty, confidence high, and right at the center of it stood an old man who didn't belong, Thomas Whitaker, thin frame, faded denim jacket despite the heat, hands resting at his sides like he had nowhere else to be and no reason to move. His posture neither defensive nor weak, just still, unnervingly still, the kind of stillness that didn't match the chaos around him. And that was exactly what drew their attention. "Hey, old-timer." One of them called out, Jason Cole, broad-shouldered, voice loud enough to make sure the others heard it. "You lost? This isn't a museum." A few chuckles followed, quick and eager, the kind that fed on each other, building momentum, turning curiosity into sport. Whitaker didn't answer, didn't even shift his gaze, his eyes fixed somewhere past them, beyond the chain-link fence, beyond the buildings, like he was listening to something none of them could hear, and that silence, that refusal to engage, only made it worse. "I'm talking to you." Cole stepped closer now, boots crunching on gravel, invading space. "That wasn't offered. You can't just wander onto a training site. There are rules here." Still nothing. Just that same quiet presence. And then someone noticed it. Not the man, but the mark, faint, worn into the skin of his forearm, just visible beneath the edge of his sleeve. A tattoo that looked less like ink and more like something time had tried, and failed, to erase. "Yo, check this out." Another recruit leaned in, pointing. "What is that? Some old biker thing?" The group shifted, tightening. Curiosity sharpening into mockery. Cole reached out before anyone stopped him, fingers brushing the fabric of Whitaker's sleeve, tugging it up just enough to expose the full shape. A simple design, weathered lines forming a circle that wasn't quite perfect, and inside it, something harder to read, something that didn't match any unit insignia they knew. "That's it?" Cole smirked, glancing back at the others. "That's your big story, eh?" Ripple of laughter followed, louder now, more confident. But Whitaker's reaction was almost imperceptible, just a slight tightening in his jaw, a breath that slowed instead of quickened. And then, finally, he spoke, voice low, rough like gravel under a tire. "Don't touch what you don't understand." It wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a clean line, and for a fraction of a second, something shifted, something small and uneasy. But Cole brushed it off with a grin. "Oh, I understand. Plenty," he said, giving the tattoo one last look. Dismissive, careless. "I understand you're in the wrong place." The recruits laughed again, but this time it didn't land the same. Not quite, because the old man hadn't moved, hadn't backed down, hadn't reacted the way they expected, and somewhere at the edge of the circle, Petty Officer Ryan Blake had gone quiet, his eyes not on the tattoo, not on the recruits, but on Whitaker himself, on the way he stood, the way his weight settled evenly. The way his shoulders stayed relaxed without ever dropping, and something about it didn't sit right. Not at all. Like watching a storm that hadn't decided to move yet, just waiting, and Blake felt it before he understood it. That creeping sense that this wasn't a man out of place, but a man who had been in places none of them could even name. And suddenly, the laughter felt louder than it should have been, like it didn't belong there anymore. The laughter did not stop all at once. It thinned, stretched unevenly across the yard like a sound that no longer knew where to land. A few recruits still smirking, a few exchanging glances that carried something quieter, something uncertain, and in the middle of it all Thomas Whitaker simply lowered his sleeve back into place with a slow, deliberate motion, as if the moment had already ended for him long before it had ended for anyone else. His fingers steady, unhurried, the fabric settling. Over the faded ink like closing a door that was never meant to be opened, Jason Cole exhaled through his nose, shaking his head as if to shake off the strange weight that had crept in. "All right, show is over," he said, louder than necessary, reclaiming the space, reclaiming the attention. "Let us get back to work." But his voice carried a faint edge now, something forced beneath the confidence. The recruits began to disperse in loose fragments, boots scraping against concrete, low murmurs replacing the earlier laughter. But not everyone moved. Ryan Blake stayed where he was, arms crossed, eyes still fixed on the old man, tracking the smallest details. The way Whitaker shifted his stance, barely noticeable, just enough to adjust to the breeze rolling in from the coast. The way his head tilted slightly, as if measuring distance without looking directly. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Blake had seen it before, not in training manuals, not in simulations, but in the rare few men who carried experience like a second skin, men who did not react because they did not need to. "Sir," Blake called out. Not loud, not challenging, just enough to bridge the distance. Whitaker paused, not turning immediately, giving the moment a weight that made Blake straighten slightly without realizing it. "You need assistance getting off base?" Blake asked, keeping his tone neutral, professional, but beneath it there was something else, a quiet test. Whitaker turned then, slowly, his eyes meeting Blake's with a calm that felt older than the place they stood in. "I was told to wait," he said, voice even, no explanation, no elaboration, just a statement that did not ask for approval. Blake felt it again, that same unease, sharper now, because there was no hesitation in the old man's words, no confusion, only certainty, and certainty. Like that did not come from nowhere. Behind him, Cole scoffed lightly, already halfway turned away. "Told by who?" He called back, dismissive, but not quite as sharp as before. Whitaker did not answer him. His attention remained on Blake, as if the question had not been worth acknowledging, and that, more than anything, made the air tighten again. Blake nodded once, slow, thoughtful, then reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone with a motion that looked casual but felt anything but. He stepped a few paces away, turning slightly so the others could not read his expression, his thumb hovering over the screen for a fraction longer than usual before dialing a number he did not use lightly. The line rang once, twice, and when it connected, his posture shifted, straighter, sharper. "Petty Officer Blake," he said quietly, eyes still on Whitaker in the distance. "I need a quick verification." There was a pause on the other end, a voice responding too low to hear. Blake swallowed once, then added, "Name is Thomas Whitaker." The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, immediate, like something had just stopped moving on the other side of the line. Blake's grip tightened slightly around the phone, his gaze narrowing, and for the first time since the moment began, the noise of the training yard seemed to fade, replaced by the faint rush of wind and the distant hum of something larger, shifting into place. The silence on the line did not break. It deepened, stretching just long enough to feel intentional, and Blake felt it settle into his chest like a weight he could not ignore. "Say that again." The voice on the other end finally replied, lower now, stripped of casual tone. Blake glanced back toward Whitaker, who had not moved, still standing with that same quiet balance as if time did not press on him the way it pressed on everyone else. "Thomas Whitaker," Blake repeated, slower this time, each word measured, and for a brief moment the world seemed to narrow to just that name, carried across a signal that suddenly felt far more important than it should have been. There was a sharp inhale from the other side, barely audible, followed by a muffled exchange as if the person had turned away from the receiver, voices layered in the background, quick, controlled, nothing like routine chatter. Blake's jaw tightened slightly, his instincts sharpening. Something was moving, not physically, not yet, but within the structure, within the unseen chain that ran deeper than rank and louder than orders. "Where are you right now?" The voice returned, firmer. Blake straightened instinctively. "Training yard, west side of the compound," he answered. "He is alone." Another pause, shorter this time, but heavier. "Do not let him leave." The instruction came clean, immediate, no hesitation. Blake blinked once, the words settling in, not aggressive, not urgent in tone, but absolute in weight. "Understood," he replied, ending the call slowly, lowering the phone but not pocketing it, his eyes lifting back to Whitaker with a clarity that had not been there before. Behind him, the recruits had resumed their routines, though unevenly, their movements just slightly out of sync, conversations quieter than usual, as if something unspoken had begun to ripple through them without explanation. Cole tossed a glance over his shoulder, catching Blake's expression. "Everything good?" he asked, casual, but watching closely now. Blake did not answer right away. his focus still locked on the old man, measuring, recalibrating everything he thought he understood about the moment. "Yeah," he said finally, but the word carried none of its usual ease. It landed flat. "Incomplete." Cole frowned slightly, then shrugged it off, turning back toward the others. But his laughter did not return, not the way it had before. The yard felt different now, the air heavier, like something was about to arrive even though nothing had changed on the surface. Whitaker shifted then, just a fraction, his gaze drifting toward the far edge of the compound. Not searching, not expecting, simply aware, and Blake followed that line without thinking, his eyes scanning the distant gate, the road beyond it shimmering faintly in the heat. Empty for now, but not for long. He could feel it, not from experience, not from protocol, but from something simpler, something older, the kind of instinct that did not need explanation. And for the first time since the moment began, Blake understood one thing with complete certainty. Whatever Thomas Whitaker was, whatever that faded tattoo meant, it was not a story meant for recruits to laugh at. It was something that reached far beyond this yard, far beyond their understanding, and it was already on its way back. The wind shifted first, subtle, carrying a low, distant hum that did not belong to the rhythm of the training yard. Not boots on gravel, not voices, something deeper, mechanical, approaching from beyond the perimeter, and Whitaker's eyes moved before anyone else reacted, not sharply, not with urgency, just a quiet acknowledgement, as if he had been expecting it long before it began. Blake felt it a second later, his head turning toward the same direction, his body straightening without instruction. While the recruits continued their drills in uneven patterns, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the change, until the sound grew louder, steady, unmistakable now, the approach of a vehicle moving faster than routine allowed, tires cutting over pavement with controlled speed, not reckless, but deliberate, and that was what made it different. Cole paused mid-step, glancing toward the gate, brows narrowing slightly. "What is that?" Someone muttered under their breath, the hum of conversation, fading again as attention shifted, one by one, toward the far edge of the compound, the gate guard snapping upright, posture tightening as the vehicle came into view. A dark SUV, unmarked but unmistakable in presence, the kind that did not stop unless it chose to. It slowed just enough for clearance, then rolled through without delay, gravel crunching sharply beneath its tires as it cut a direct line toward the training yard. And now everyone was watching, drills forgotten, conversations gone, replaced by a silence that spread faster. Then the vehicle moved. Blake did not move, did not step forward, but something in his stance changed, more formal, more aligned, as if he had just remembered where he was standing and who might be about to step out. The SUV came to a controlled stop 20 yards from Whitaker, engine idling low, heat rippling off the hood in the afternoon sun, and for a moment, nothing happened. No doors opening, no voices, just that quiet, suspended second where everything seemed to hold its breath. Then the rear door opened, smooth, unhurried, and a man stepped out, tall, composed, uniform precise without being overstated, the kind of presence that did not need introduction because it carried its own recognition. Commander Nathan Hayes, and the effect was immediate, not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Blake came to attention without thinking, the motion crisp, automatic, as if pulled by something deeper than protocol. A few of the recruits followed a half-second later, others slower, confusion flickering across their faces as they tried to catch up to a moment they did not fully understand. Cole straightened, shoulders squaring, uncertainty creeping in where confidence had been. Hayes did not look at them. Not yet. His gaze moved across the yard once. Quick, efficient, taking in the scene, the formation, the tension, and then it settled on Whitaker, and something changed, not in his posture, but in his eyes. A recognition that was quiet but unmistakable. He began walking forward. Measured steps, boots striking the ground with a steady rhythm that seemed louder than it should have been in the silence. Each step closing the distance, each second stretching longer than the last, until he stopped just a few feet in front of the old man. And for the first time since the vehicle arrived, the entire yard felt completely still, no movement, no sound, just two figures facing each other, one in command, one in stillness, and neither of them said a word. Commander Hayes stopped within arm's length, close enough to see the fine lines etched into Whitaker's face, the kind that did not come from age alone, but from years that left their mark without asking permission. And for a moment neither of them moved, the air between them steady, charged not with tension, but with recognition that did not need words. Hayes's eyes dropped, not in hesitation, but in focus, tracing the edge of Whitaker's sleeve as if confirming something already known. And Whitaker, without being asked, without breaking that quiet composure, slowly lifted his arm, the motion deliberate, controlled, revealing the faded tattoo once more, the lines worn but unmistakable to the right eyes. And something shifted in Hayes's expression, subtle but absolute, like a lock turning into place. Behind them the recruits watched in complete silence now, no one daring to speak, no one quite understanding what they were witnessing, but all of them feeling the weight of it settle in. Cole stood rigid, his earlier confidence gone, replaced by a tightening in his chest he could not explain. Blake did not move at all, his attention fixed entirely on Hayes, waiting, measuring, because this was the moment that would define everything that came before it. Hayes inhaled once, slow, steady, and then, without a word, he reached up to his own sleeve, fingers precise as he rolled it back just enough to reveal his forearm. And there it was, the same design, not identical in wear, but identical in meaning, the same imperfect circle, the same mark that did not belong to any official record. And the effect was immediate, not loud, not explosive, but final, a quiet confirmation that rippled through the space like a shockwave no one could see. Blake felt it first as a tightening in his posture, an instinctive understanding snapping into place. Cole's breath caught without him realizing it, his eyes flicking between the two men, trying to process what he had dismissed only minutes ago. Hayes lowered his arm again, covering the tattoo with the same controlled motion, and then he looked back at Whitaker, not as a superior, not as a commander, but as one man recognizing another across a distance that had nothing to do with rank. And in that silence there was history, not spoken, not explained, but present in the way neither of them needed to ask questions. The wind moved lightly across the yard, carrying the faint scent of salt and dust, and still no one spoke, because something about the moment made words feel unnecessary, even intrusive. Hayes straightened slightly, not rigid, not formal yet, just enough to mark a shift, and Blake saw it. The exact second where authority gave way to something deeper, something earned long before this day, long before this place, and for the first time since the old man had stepped into the yard, it was no longer unclear who he was, not in rank, not in title, but in presence. And that realization settled over the recruits like a weight they could not shake, because whatever they had thought they were looking at before, whatever assumptions they had made, they were now standing in front of something entirely different, something they had not been trained to recognize. And the silence that followed was not empty, it was full, heavy with the understanding that they had crossed a line they never even saw. No one gave the order, and yet the shift happened all at once, subtle but undeniable, as if something invisible had passed through the yard and reset the balance of it. Commander Hayes took one small step back, just enough to create space, not distance, and his posture changed with it, straightening into something more formal, more defined, the kind of posture that carried decades of discipline behind it. Blake saw it instantly, his spine locking into full attention, boots planted firm, shoulders squared, the movement crisp and automatic. But this time it was not just protocol, it was understanding. One by one the recruits followed, slower, uneven, their motions catching up to a moment they had not been prepared for. Cole hesitated half a second longer than the rest, the weight of realization pressing down as he straightened, eyes fixed forward but drawn back again and again to the old man standing in front of them. Hayes did not look at the formation, not yet. His focus remained on Whitaker, steady, unwavering. And then, with no announcement, no build-up, he raised his right hand in a slow, deliberate motion, the kind of salute that was not performed out of habit, but placed with intention, each inch of movement measured, controlled. And when his hand reached his brow, the entire yard seemed to hold its breath. The silence deepened, no shuffle of boots, no whisper of fabric, nothing but the faint sound of wind brushing across the concrete and the distant hum of the idling engine behind them. Blake felt it like a weight in his chest, the significance of the gesture settling in fully now. Because this was not recognition of rank, not acknowledgement of position. This was something rarer, something that could not be assigned or earned through paperwork. Cole's throat tightened as he watched, his mind replaying every word he had said, every laugh that now echoed differently in his memory, the tattoo, the silence, the warning he had ignored, and now this. The commander of their unit standing in front of the same man they had mocked, offering a salute that carried more weight than anything they had seen in training. Whitaker did not react immediately. He did not mirror the gesture, did not rush to return it. He simply stood there, meeting Hayes's gaze with the same calm he had held from the beginning, as if this moment, this recognition, was not a surprise but an inevitability, something that had been waiting to surface, and after a long second, he gave the smallest nod, not a salute, not a formal response, just an acknowledgement that passed between them without needing to be explained. Hayes held the salute for a heartbeat longer, then lowered his hand with the same control, turning slightly now, his attention finally shifting toward the recruits, and the air changed again, not with tension, but with clarity, because whatever uncertainty had existed before was gone, replaced by a truth that did not need to be spoken. Blake remained at attention, unmoving, while Cole felt the weight of that silence press in from all sides, heavier now, sharper, because this time he understood exactly what it meant, and there was no place left to hide from it. Commander Hayes did not raise his voice when he turned to face them, and that was what made it heavier, the absence of volume forcing every word to land with precision. Eyes forward, he said, calm, controlled, and the entire line snapped tighter, shoulders squared, chins lifted, the kind of correction that came not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that something far more serious than a routine inspection was unfolding. Hayes took a slow step along the front of the formation, his gaze passing over each recruit one by one, not searching, not questioning, simply observing, and wherever his eyes paused, even for a fraction of a second, it felt like pressure, like being measured against a standard none of them had been fully introduced to. Cole felt it when Hayes stopped in front of him, just for a moment, not long enough to speak, not long enough to explain, but long enough for the silence to say everything that needed to be said. And in that space, Cole's earlier words replayed again, sharper now, stripped of humor, stripped of confidence, leaving only the weight of them behind. Hayes moved on without comment, continuing down the line until he reached Blake, and there, he gave the smallest nod, a recognition not just of action but of awareness. Blake held steady, but inside, something settled into place, a quiet confirmation that he had done what needed to be done without fully understanding why at the time. Hayes turned back toward the group as a whole, hands resting loosely at his sides, posture composed. You saw a man, he said, voice even, carrying just enough to reach every corner of the yard. And you decided what he was worth before you understood what you were looking at. No anger, no accusation, just a statement, and that made it land harder. The recruits remained still, eyes forward, but the tension in their stance was unmistakable now. Hayes let the silence follow, letting the words settle, letting them do their work without rushing to fill the space. Then he continued. Out there. He gestured slightly, not pointing to any specific direction, but to something beyond the fence, beyond the base. You will not get a second chance to recognize what matters. The wind moved lightly across the yard again, carrying his words in a way that felt deliberate. And sometimes, he added, his gaze shifting briefly back toward Whitaker, who had not moved, still standing with that same quiet presence. The only difference between walking past something and understanding it is respect. The word hung there, simple, but heavier than anything that had been said before. Cole felt it settle into his chest, not as embarrassment, not as fear, but as something deeper, something that forced him to reevaluate not just the moment, but the way he had approached everything leading up to it. Hayes took one final step back, aligning himself between the formation and Whitaker, a position that made the message unmistakable without needing to say it outright. Blake remained locked in place, but his awareness shifted outward, taking in the entire scene, the formation, the commander, the old man, and the space between them that had changed so completely in such a short time. And in that silence, in that stillness, the recruits, understood something they had not been taught in any manual, something that could not be simulated or repeated on command. That respect was not given because of what was visible. It was given because of what had been carried long before anyone else was there to see it. And once that understanding took hold, the yard did not feel the same anymore. The silence did not break when Hayes finished speaking. It settled deeper, spreading through the formation until even the smallest movements fell out of place. And for a long moment no one shifted, no one spoke, because the weight of what had just been said was still finding its place. Then Hayes turned back toward Whitaker, the movement calm, unhurried, as if the lesson had already been delivered and no further explanation was necessary. "Sir," he said, not loud, not formal in tone, but deliberate, the word carrying a respect that did not come from rank charts or protocol sheets. Whitaker met his gaze again, the same steady calm in his eyes, unchanged from the moment he had first stepped onto the yard. "I appreciate you coming out," Hayes continued, his voice lower now, meant only for the space between them, but still heard by those close enough to understand its meaning. Whitaker gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible. "I was in the area," he replied, simple, understated as if the entire chain of events that had just unfolded required no further explanation. Hayes allowed the corner of his expression to soften just slightly, not quite a smile, but something close to it, something that acknowledged more than words could carry. Behind them the recruits remained at attention, but their awareness had shifted completely, no longer focused on maintaining posture, but on absorbing every detail, every word, every silence that passed between the two men. Cole kept his eyes forward now, but his peripheral vision betrayed him, pulling back again and again toward Whitaker, toward the tattoo he had dismissed, toward the quiet presence he had failed to recognize. And each time the realization pressed harder, Blake remained steady, but his mind was no longer questioning. It was aligning, connecting the fragments into something whole, something that made sense only when viewed from the right perspective. Hayes took a half step back, giving Whitaker space, not as a dismissal but as a gesture, an acknowledgement that whatever brought him here did not require permission to end. "Vehicle is ready whenever you are," Hayes said, turning his head slightly toward the waiting SUV. Whitaker glanced in that direction, then back once more at the formation, his eyes moving across the line, not judging, not lingering, simply seeing. And in that brief pass, something shifted again, quieter this time, but no less powerful, because the recruits felt it, the absence of resentment, the absence of anger. Just a calm recognition that they had been part of a moment they did not yet fully understand. Whitaker adjusted his sleeve again, covering the tattoo without ceremony, the motion as deliberate as before, closing that chapter as simply as it had been opened. Then he stepped forward, passing Hayes with a small nod, not needing escort, not needing direction, moving toward the SUV with the same steady pace he had carried from the beginning. Hayes watched him go, not turning away, not breaking posture, until the old man reached the vehicle and the door opened once more, the engine still idling softly in the background, the sound now less intrusive, more like a quiet signal that the moment was nearing its end. Whitaker paused briefly at the door, not looking back at the recruits, not needing to. Then he stepped inside, the door closing with a soft, final sound that seemed louder than it should have been in the silence. And as the vehicle began to move, rolling slowly back across the yard toward the gate, the space it left behind did not return to what it had been, because something fundamental had shifted, something that would not reset when the engine noise faded or when the drills resumed. Hayes remained where he was, eyes following the departing vehicle for a second longer. Then he turned back to the formation, and though he did not speak again, the message was already complete, written not in words but in the silence they now understood. The sound of the engine faded as the vehicle disappeared beyond the gate, leaving behind a silence that felt different from before, not tense, not uncertain, but settled, like something had been placed exactly where it belonged. And for a long moment no one moved. The recruits still standing in formation, eyes forward, but their focus no longer fixed on discipline alone, it was turned inward now, each of them replaying the moment in their own way, measuring it against what they thought they knew, and finding something missing, something they had overlooked. Commander Hayes remained still at the front, his presence steady, allowing the quiet to do its work, Because he knew it mattered more than anything he could say. Blake felt it clearly, the shift from confusion to understanding, the way the pieces had aligned into something simple but powerful, and he held that stillness, letting it anchor in. Cole stood the same as the others, posture correct, but his breathing had changed. Slower now, more controlled, not forced, but intentional, his mind no longer replaying the laughter, but the moment that followed it, the salute, the recognition, the weight of something he had not earned but had witnessed, and that was enough to change the way he stood, the way he saw the space around him. Hayes finally moved, a small step forward, not to command, but to close the distance between instruction and understanding. Training resumes, he said, calm, direct, and the words broke through silence without shattering it. The recruits responded immediately, voices sharp, unified, but there was a difference now, something beneath the sound that had not been there before, something steadier, more grounded. They moved back into position, drills restarting, boots striking the concrete in rhythm, but the energy had shifted, the careless edge was gone, replaced by a focus that came from knowing there was more to learn than what could be written down. Hayes stepped aside, watching for a moment, not correcting, not interrupting, simply observing, and then he turned, walking back toward the waiting space where the vehicle had been, his pace unhurried, as if the purpose of his presence had already been fulfilled. Blake caught a glimpse of him as he passed, and for a brief second, their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement that required no words, just understanding. Cole continued his drill, movements precise, but his awareness extended beyond the immediate task, every detail sharper, every instruction carrying more weight, because now he understood something he had not before, that not every story announces itself, not every mark is meant to be explained, and not every man who stands quietly in the corner is someone you can measure at a glance. The sun hung high over the yard, casting long shadows that stretched across the concrete, blending together, indistinct, just like the line between what was seen and what was known. And as the rhythm of training settled back into place, one thing remained, quiet but permanent, a lesson that did not need repeating, because it had already been lived in front of them. That respect is not something you wait to give after you understand. It is something you give first, because some histories do not need to speak to be real, and some men do not need to prove who they are, because they have already lived it.